All right, guys. So we are less than 1 month out from the November election, and Kamala Harris is doing a little bit of a media blitz right now. She went on Howard Stern, she went on 60 Minutes, she went on The View, she went on Stephen Colbert. And so I just wanted to show you guys a couple of clips that stood out to me in terms of what I think is Kamala Harris airballing on some pretty easy layup questions here. So let's go ahead and jump into this first Stephen Colbert clip.
Polling shows that a lot of people, especially independent voters, really want this to be a change election, and that they tend to break for you in terms of thinking about change. You are a member of the president's administration. Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden,
I noticed.
and so that would be one change in terms of. But also, I think it's important to say, with 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump. And so when we think about the significance of what this next generation of leadership looks like, were I to be elected president, it is about, frankly, I love the American people, and I believe in our country. I love that it is our character and nature to be an ambitious people. We have aspirations, we have dreams, we have incredible work ethic, and I just believe that we can create and build upon the success we've achieved in a way that we continue to grow opportunity, and in that way grow the strength of our nation. So, for example, my economic policies, I think of it, and I've named it as creating an opportunity economy.
Okay. I don't know about you guys, but to me at least, this is the kind of answer from a politician that infuriates me almost like nothing else. It's the pandering, the vagueness, the I'm going to say absolutely nothing and pretend as if I'm saying something profound kind of answer that I don't know if it's Kamala Harris or I don't know if it's the people around her who are telling her to speak like this, but guys, what the fuck did she just say? The question was pretty simple. Voters want change, right? People are struggling. Okay, they're struggling to keep a roof over their head, rent, housing costs, absolutely explosively expensive, right? The cost of groceries is too high. People are struggling to make it by. Wages are stagnant, etc., etc. And instead of responding with anything substantive whatsoever off the bat, she starts out by saying, number one, I'm not Joe Biden. Okay, cool. Number two, I'm not Trump. Okay, we got that. We know that, right? And then she goes into like a minute straight of just meandering nonsense about how she loves the character and the ambition of the American people and opportunity something. At least start the answer with something basic, man. Pick like 2, 3, 4 policies that you're running on right now, right? Some of the things that Kamala's talked about, like the tax credit for first-time home buyers, right? Or the child tax credit, or whatever the case may be. Right? Even though I don't think her policy agenda is nearly bold enough, nearly, approaching this from a left-wing economic populist approach, even though I think her actual stated agenda is absolutely pathetic on an economic front, go with what you're running on and just talk about that, right? Here's how I'm going to materially improve the lives of average working class Americans. 1, 2, 3. These are my big 3 policies I'm going to fight for if I win. People know that you're not Joe Biden. People know that you are not Donald Trump, right? And it's perfectly fair. If you want to get into specifics and substance and attack Donald Trump for having dictatorial ambitions and being an authoritarian and being corrupt and, serving the billionaire class and giant corporations, do all of that. That's fantastic. Attack him for all of that. Or option number 2 is to talk about your actual policy agenda. But she constantly does shit like this, where it's like, I don't give a fuck what your interpretation of the American people's character and ambition is. How are you going to address healthcare costs? How are you going to give me a living wage? How are you going to get rid of the mountains of debt that the American people are facing? Something of substance, right? So that was an absolute whiff. Don't know what's going on with that. Now we move on to The View, because this was another appearance that she made. And similar question here. What would you have done differently than Joe Biden, right? Let's hear her answer.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had.
Okay. Again, guys, Joe Biden had to drop out for a reason, right? Joe Biden was not on a good trajectory in terms of getting reelected against Trump. There's a reason he had to be replaced, right? If Kamala was smart, she would distance herself from Joe Biden as much as physically possible, right? Even though Joe Biden passed some policies that I think were at least a couple steps in the right direction, again, didn't go far enough, but, he invested in American manufacturing. He brought back manufacturing jobs to the U.S., right? He had a very good FTC under Lena Khan. He had a pretty decent NLRB, right? So there were a couple of things that I could applaud Joe Biden for doing. Pulling out of Afghanistan. There's another one, right? Many things I could critique him for, some things I could give him credit for. But just politically, from a political angle, to tie yourself to the Biden administration is insanity. It's insanity, right? You wouldn't change anything. Nothing, right? I mean, keep in mind what the polling data is showing right now. People are not happy with Joe Biden's presidency, right? They don't think the country is heading in the right direction. So if you're Kamala Harris, you don't want to tie yourself to Joe Biden, right? You want to be the change candidate, as Stephen Colbert was leading her into the previous question there. You want to be the change candidate, and she has a remarkable opportunity to potentially be the change candidate, even though somehow, because she's the vice president right now, she's in the current administration, because Donald Trump was already the president, she could still be viewed as the change candidate. But here she is tying herself to the hip. I mean, this is another layup question that you could have answered in a way where you didn't necessarily piss off Joe Biden or just completely throw him under the bus, because we know she's not going to do that. But again, just bring up some things that you would plan on doing that Joe Biden didn't get done. Something like that. Instead, she does this. Now, of course, Republicans are already spending heavily to promote this clip, right? That there's not a thing that she would have done differently over the past 4 years than President Biden. As Eddinger Mentum says here, I would like to apologize for calling for Kamala to do more media appearances. I assumed that she would not say things like this, but it appears that I thought too highly of her, and he's correct there. Now, we also have another clip here from The View, where Kamala Harris follows up on that previous answer where she said she wouldn't do anything different than Biden. Here's what she says. Oh, I have an idea. Here's what I actually would do differently.
Yeah. Listen, I plan on having a Republican in my cabinet. I got a list. Yes, right. You asked me what's the difference between Joe Biden and me. Well, that will be one of the differences. I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet because I don't feel burdened by letting pride get in the way of a good idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Okay. So first off, layer number one, this doesn't even really make sense in terms of this being a difference from the Biden administration, because Joe Biden's his whole shtick is I'm the guy who can reach across the aisle, right? That's kind of what he ran on in 2020, as opposed to Bernie Sanders, who's always too radical. He'll never be able to get anything passed because Republicans will never get on board with his ideas and he'll never be able to work with other people. That was Joe Biden's whole thing, right? Even as Republicans were torching his agenda throughout the entirety of his administration, he still was cozying up to them over and over and over again. So the idea that I'm going to have a Republican in my administration, and that is some big breakaway from how Joe Biden was operating because Joe Biden is a radical lefty or something. What are we talking about? That's not even a difference from Joe Biden. I mean, I guess technically, as far as I can think of from his core cabinet positions, Biden doesn't have an out-and-out Republican. But this is the point where you try to separate yourself. Now, I guess there are some people out there, maybe some right-leaning independents or undecided voters who would say, oh, okay, cool. She's willing to have somebody from the other side of the aisle on her team. Okay, I mean, I could see how, hypothetically, that could appeal to some segment of the population. But again, it's all just so pathetic, man. To me, the biggest mistake that Kamala is making right now is, I guess several different things, but the primary ones are, number one, she's not breaking away from Biden on an obvious genocide, right? This is something that could cost her swing states in this election by completely supporting what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, to the Lebanese, now to potentially escalate this towards a war with Iran. That's one thing that I think she's making a huge mistake on. Incredibly unpopular policy. The other thing that I think she's making a mistake on is she's not focusing enough on the Tim Walz style economic populism, right? Again, remember, when Kamala picked Tim Walz, I was shocked because I was like, wow, look at this guy's record as the governor. right? Is it perfect? No, but did he get a lot of like more left-leaning social democratic policies passed in Minnesota while he was the governor? Yeah, I mean, he probably had the single most progressive, economic record as a governor in the entire country over the last number of years. And so when she picked Tim Walz to be her VP, I was like, oh, maybe we're not going to keep making the same mistakes of leaning to the right and adopting right-wing framing on everything, going into this election. And then I was completely wrong, right? She basically threw everything out that Tim Walz did in Minnesota, his it's seemingly like his belief system. She kind of just like put that under the table and was like, no, I need to spin to the right on everything. I need to be pro-fracking, anti-Medicare for all, anti-Green New Deal. I need to be super far right on immigration, for example, even though a few years ago we were calling Trump a fascist for locking kids up in cages and wanting to build a border wall. No, now I'm very far right on the issue of the border. I mean, issue by issue by issue, she is making the same mistakes that Democrats have made year after year after year after year in these elections. So, I mean, listen, guys, at this point, the election is so close that marginal issues could make a massive difference. Tying yourself to Joe Biden, huge political mistake. When you're asked about being the change candidate and you can't provide a single policy off the top of your head immediately that could catch in people's minds, that's a huge mistake, right? Trying to make your entire strategy, I'm not Donald Trump, I guess it could work. You could get bailed out because people do hate Donald Trump for very legitimate reasons. But if that's your entire strategy, I think that's a pretty big mistake. So she's not leaning enough into left-wing economic populism, right? She's not separating from the Biden administration when it comes to one of the core issues in many of these swing states, especially a state like Michigan, when it comes to the genocide in Gaza. And so we have an election that basically hasn't moved. I mean, this was a clip from CNN. I mean, you can see how much state poll averages miss by. The average error is 3.4 points. 5% of errors are greater than 9.4 points. And throughout this clip, they basically break down how the entire election is a complete toss-up, right? There are so many different outcomes that could happen. If Kamala wins, I mean, in this example here, she could win Nevada. She could win the Rust Belt here with Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And she could win that way, 276 electoral votes. You could have Trump winning. I mean, you break it down state by state, and everything is within the margin of error, right? This is a complete toss-up. It's a toss-up of an election as we've ever seen. Pennsylvania, it's D+1. Michigan, it's D+1.1. Wisconsin, D+1.2. North Carolina, R+0.7. Georgia, R+0.7. Arizona, R+1.3. Nevada, D+1.5. Every single one of these core swing states is within the margin of error. This is a coin toss election. And the reason I bring this up is because it shouldn't be a fucking coin toss election. It shouldn't be. Your opponent is Donald Trump, okay? Somebody we've already seen in power for 4 years. His biggest accomplishment was a massive tax cut for billionaires and giant corporations, right? The guy who tried who did January 6th and tried to overturn the last election. The guy who has since been indicted on, 34 felony counts? This guy. The guy who gets up there and rambles about Haitian migrants eating people's pets on a daily basis. This is your opponent. This is your opponent. It should not be a close election. And the fact that it is, it's not necessarily just an indictment on the American people. It's an indictment on the Democratic Party. If you were running on, here's how I'm going to structurally change the fundamental issues that we have in this country, if you were leaning in to a left-wing populist economic agenda, this would not be looking like this, right? This outline here that we have, this would not be this close. It's this close, I think at least, because Democrats aren't really standing for anything. Kamala isn't really standing for anything. She's flip-flopped on her positions a million different times, from when she was in the Senate, to when she ran in 2020, to when she became the VP, to now as a 2024 candidate. Flip-flopped, abandoned positions, taken on radically different positions. And I think people can see that when you're not doing consistent messaging on popular policy, people don't know what you fucking stand for, outside of not being Donald Trump and not being Joe Biden, apparently, then it's a risky strategy. It's a pretty risky strategy, to say the least. So there you have it, guys. I wish I could tell you. I wish I had a confident prediction as to what's going to happen in this election. As of right now, again, to me, it's 50-50. 50-50. I could see it easily going either way. A lot could happen, I guess, in the next month. But as of right now, depressingly, I think we're seeing Democrats make the same mistakes that Hillary Clinton made. I think we're seeing Democrats make the same mistake that even like liberal or center-right parties, even across the rest of the world, like the Labour Party in the UK is a great example, or Macron in France, they're all making the same mistakes. They're not spinning to the left and running on a populist left-wing agenda. They're spinning to the right and adopting right-wing framing. And that doesn't fucking work. It just doesn't work, right? So we'll have to keep track of this, I guess. We've got a month away. A lot can happen, and hopefully something does.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying